Power Apps is a low-code tool that can deliver huge results for companies, but can also deliver bigger headaches for their developers and the users if you do one of these top 5 mistakes in this video. Make sure you hang out until the end to find out the largest mistake that derails projects and frustrates users. We've been doing Power Apps for a long time at Pragmatic Works, and we've seen a lot of crazy applications and huge mistakes from users, and we've made many of these mistakes ourselves. We wanted to catalog some of the top 5 mistakes that you might make as a developer. In number 5, not using solutions for Power Apps and the Power Platform as a whole is a huge mistake that makes it much more difficult to manage your solution going forward. So what are solutions? Well, solutions give you a way of containerizing all of your assets into one folder. For example, you can have all of your Power Apps, your tables, your security structure, as well as your Power Automate workflows and your chatbots all inside of one container. Then you can move that container from development to QA to production. Not doing this can ultimately make it where you miss different assets, you don't bring over everything, and it can create a huge amount of errors for you. When you go and export a solution from development to production, it exports one zip file that you essentially will import into other areas. You can always retrofit an old system that you may have built, an old application or an old Power Automate flow into a solution later. So let's see how we can do that also. So I'm going to go over to make.powerapps.com. Inside of this, I'll go over to solution. In my case, is right up top here. Then we'll go to new solution. We'll give our solution a name. Okay, and a publisher. A publisher is something you'll create. You'll create one for your department or one for your entire company. A publisher tells you who is responsible for this application. It can also tell you what the contact information is for that user in case they need to find out a support issue, for example. Publishers also put a prefix on every single object you create. So why are these interesting? Why are prefixes interesting? Well, prefixes make it where every object is named with a certain 3 or 4 letter qualifier in front of it. So when you open up Power BI reports later, or you just want to find all of your stuff, it will all have that same prefix on it. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and create a new publisher, and I'll call this just Acme Inc. The name of it will be without the space, and then I'll do ACM for Acme, for example. Notice that every object will have ACM in front of it. The choice prefix, don't worry about this time. That's for choices for drop-down boxes. I'll go ahead and select up. Whoop, go ahead and, there you go. Whoop, my button is just a little bit out of the way there. There we go. Let's go ahead and get that button saved. All right. And once we save that, now we can go through and hit the save button on the actual application. There you go, on the publisher. So I'll go ahead and select Acme Inc. here, and then hit save again at the bottom. Now our publisher has been created. Now what can we do with this publisher now it's been created? Well, we'll create all of our assets inside of this. So one of the largest mistakes I see people make is when they want to go and change a table in Dataverse or change an application, they go specifically over to the left side and click on tables. Instead, you should always create your tables right here. We can also add old assets into this right here. So if I go and add a table, I can choose a table, hit the add button, and it will then add that table right to this asset library as well. If I go new here, we can see we can add all of our apps, automations, and all of our co-pilots, and even things like Power BI assets can be all added to this solution. Now, once we're done, we can move this by going over to Overview. We hit the export button. It will then export all the information out and then move it to the other environment that I want to do. Now, this also makes it where we can do a few other things. Things like environment variables, where as somebody imports this in, we can create environment variables that say, who is the administrator that should be notified of a failure? Or who is the, what SharePoint list do I want to point to? These environment variables allow the admin to, without even opening up the application or the flow, make changes very easily inside there. So that was number 5 in our list. Number 4 in our top 5 mistakes that new developers make is ignoring delegation warnings. Delegation warnings are where Power Apps can't figure out how to translate your code into a query against whatever data source you're using. SharePoint is notorious bad about this. There are certain types of functions, if you use, will cause delegation warnings. So what happens here? Let's take a look at this application right here. In this application, you're seeing that I have a warning right over here. And I can select this warning, hit the edit button, and we can see that the error is coming right here. So what is causing this problem? What is this problem? When it cannot figure out how to handle the query, what powerapps does is it brings over all the data that it can into the application and run the query in the application. When delegation is working properly, it will pass the query right to the database or SharePoint and bring back the results without having to do anything on the client side. This means the queries be much faster, much faster. And it also means that you might get the wrong answer sometimes if you do have delegation warnings. Why is that? Well, let's take a look at this data set right here. I have right here a number of party supplies. This is a real application we got from a customer, and it's going to have some pretty bad oddities. I went ahead and anonymized all the data and made it where it's not the real data in this case. But in this example, if I were to hit the play button, you'll notice right now, the delegation party, as far as the user is concerned, no problems, right? I can search for party, and then long delay, I get back the 3 party results. This is a relatively small table in SharePoint that it's getting data from. Now, when I hit the settings icon on the far left here, you'll notice one of the properties is around row limit, data row limit. Now, this does not mean that powerapps can only support 500 rows. Most certainly does not mean that. It means when delegation events happen, how many rows are going to be brought into the data to the application from the database. So in my case, you'd think, well, let's put this to 10,000, that will go away. No, the most we can always put right now is 2,000 rows. Not that we want to do that, but we could go that low. Let me lower this number to 5, just to kind of demonstrate the problem we're going to experience. So when you look at this, we're going to see that we have our delegation problem, and this is notorious when we use a search syntax from within SharePoint. Now, we can use things like starts with, filters, and those kind of things to ultimately get around this issue. But contain searches, where I'm looking for party on any of these words right here, cause our problem. So party supplies, supply party store, those kind of things. So I'm looking for the word party inside of a string, it will give us a delegation problem inside of SharePoint. It does not happen with things like SQL Server or other types of databases like that, like Dataverse and the like. But SharePoint does have this issue. There are ways around it, and above me, I'll put a link to a video about how to avoid these. But let's see the issue here real quick. As you can see, as I scroll down this data here, we do have a lot of things that have the word party inside of it. So, okay, I did 5 rows, right? Party bus rental, and a few other things like that. So we're seeing party hat, party bus rental, and so on. Party favors. But keep in mind, the delegation right now is only set to 5 rows. So that means the first 5 rows are going to come over. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to miss from napkins down. So when I search for party, I am going to get the wrong answer. I'm going to miss party favors and party bus because it's not part of the top 5 records. Do you see the problem? It's not just a performance issue, but it's also going to cause problems with your actual getting the right answer back. So when I play this app and I search for party, we're going to get back, after a long answer, 1 answer back. So most certainly not what we want to see here. The way around this is you can find a number of our videos that we've made in the past that will have you convert this to things like starts with, ends with, or bring in things like Power Automate to externalize this data a little more and have it do the combing for you instead. So SharePoint has issues like this with any kind of contains, some types of date searches also, but the moral of the story is do not avoid this unless you have less than 500 rows. At that point, you're just going to see it's a slower load time for these queries like this. All right, so that's number 4 in our list. Number 3 is not using proper naming conventions. Now, it's not important that you use my naming convention or somebody else's naming convention. It's just important that you use some type of naming convention. There are some good practices though. The first thing is do not put spaces in the names that you're seeing on the side. So all these names right here, try to avoid spaces. You'll see I'm using a naming convention right here, and you'll find my naming convention in the description of this video. Again, not important to use mine, just find it, use it, adopt it, and make it your own. But make sure the entire team is using it. Now, why is this important? Well, there's a few reasons that make this so much easier. So let's imagine right here, for example, I want this to show whatever item you selected on the left side. So when I go over to here and I say, I'm going to remove my product and I'm going to type in GAL for gallery. And I'm like, oh crap, which gallery am I looking for here? So In this case, what I would recommend is we want to rename these galleries to what the purpose is. I generally lean towards Hungarian notation because I'm an old man. And Hungarian notation is something I used to use in the 90s and the early 2000s. But I find it very easy to kind of adopt and learn. So if I go over to here and I look for my gallery, there it is. I can rename it in the top right or rename it right here on the bottom left here. When I double click on it, Hungarian notation, usually you'll have a 3-letter qualifier of whatever the object is. In my case, it's a gallery. So I'll use GAL and I'll put list products, some kind of noun, adjective kind of thing here, noun, verb kind of thing in my case. So as you can see, GAL list products makes a lot of sense. So when I go over here and I start typing GAL, I can immediately see that this is my object. It's doing what I wanted to do. Hit tab, dot selected, boom, dot, and then I'll type in, title or whatever I want to show them. So it's going to make your life a lot easier. And when I pass this application to you, it will also make it easier for you to understand the application. This is also important when you go from navigating from screen to screen. So if you have SCR, welcome, SCR, main form, and those kind of things, it's going to make it easier for you to identify the screen that you're navigating to. So proper naming conventions is a super easy way for you as a beginner to act more like an intermediate or a more advanced developer. All right, so the next one, number 2 in our list, is not using containers. These are awesome new ways, not really new ways anymore. They've been around for a few years, but they make it where you can easily make an application that looks like this, look a lot more polished and be responsive as well. So containers come in a few flavors. You'll find containers that are more ad hoc. If I go to the insert ribbon here and I search for containers, you'll see containers that are more ad hoc. And you have horizontal and vertical containers, which are more like traditional HTML development. We have div tags and you're kind of moving things around and collapsing them. So for true responsiveness, these two are the most responsive of all these. But the other containers, if you don't want to deal with that, this other container is also very, very effective at kind of moving things around and making them look a lot more polished. So let's see how we can do these. Well, first of all, in case you're not seeing containers or not seeing some themes in here, I'm going to go to settings right here and go to updates. And I'm going to turn on the modern controls here under updates just to make sure I've got everything that I want to see here. Next, I'm going to go ahead and create a new screen. And these are all containerized already for me. So I want like a 2-zone application with a header. So I'm going to select this one right here. But you can see in this screenshot right here, we've got a little version of it right there, which is showing how responsive this is going to be. So let me go ahead and select that. And you can already tell how much better this is going to be versus what we had before. So I'm going to do this really quickly and be really lazy right here. I'm going to go over to my first screen and I'll just go ahead and take this guy right here, copy him. All right, go over to my next screen. Oh, that is not the screen. Sorry. Thought I dropped it in. Oh, yeah, I did. There he is. He's down here. Sorry. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and paste him in. Just copy paste. All right. We got a little bit of some alignment issue, but we'll fix that in a moment. And I'll go back over here again. We have the gallery. Let's go and grab our form. Again, I'll copy. Let's go down here and then paste. And you can already see it's got a lot of work to do to make this a prettier application. But if I go up top, there's also a new object called a header object and that modern objects. And you can already see how much better this screen, the new screen, is compared to the old screen. Of course, we should use naming conventions and all that, but here's the cool part. Now, let me go and show you the problem in the old screen. I'm going to play the application, and when I try using this on an iPhone 11, for example, you can see that a lot of stuff is missing here. If I select something, it's off screen. I might be able to rotate. There's ways around this where you can do like a scale to screen and all that, where it will work. However, in my case, I want to go over here and look at the new screen and see how it behaves instead. I'll hit that play button and look at the difference already. I can see that as I kind of scroll down here, I can select different objects. Let's try this on a tablet instead. Oh, nice. Everything's kind of scaling down. What happens if I rotate it? Okay, that makes sense. Let's try an iPhone with rotation. Okay, but notice everything is fitting accordingly here. iPhone 11 looks great. So it's automatically handling the responsiveness for me. Now, this requires a little bit of work to do right. This is on a Windows screen here. So as we do this, everything scales appropriately. As I kind of skinny this up and down, there we go. You'll see it kind of handles that responsiveness for me when I'm playing the application. So it's working like a boss. So Containers are an easy way of making this more responsive with a minimal amount of work. They do require some learning on that. We do have some videos on how to use containers, but they make it a lot easier for you to kind of manipulate this on an iPhone or an Android or a tablet device that are more small. All right, now our number one thing that we find that clients forget, and the one thing that really bites them on projects, is not getting analog first, not whiteboarding the application. So in other words, talking to your customer, getting a whiteboard out, drawing something like, all right, do you want this to be like a 3-zone app, or are you seeing a header here? Start drawing a header. Do you want it to be, what do you mean a 3-zone app? Well, I mean, we would have maybe some data over here, or do you want it to be tiles? And not asking those questions up front, like, all right, yes, I do want tiles to kind of see the data, and I want a menu bar up top. And that's going to help you identify what types of things you're missing, what types of things Power Apps may not be able to do. Am I using a Canvas app or a model-driven app? You're going to be able to shake all those things out in that early conversation just by whiteboarding. And once you have that, your application is going to go a lot smoother, and you always have a fallback plan saying, hey, we whiteboarded this. We talked about this earlier. I sent you the screenshot, so you're not happy with this. For extra bonus points, you can use things like Figma to actually really do a full mockup. Although I find at that point, an analog, really lo-fi type of mockup usually goes a lot farther, just kind of simply moving the project along, and then just going right into coding after that. But you can use this and then kind of build out your arrows that when I click on here, it'll go to another screen. What should this look like if I go responsive with it? Kind of get all those kind of pieces hammered out early on. So in this video, we showed you the top 5 mistakes that developers make when they're learning Power Apps. So what big mistake did you think I missed? In the comments section, add what mistake you made when you first learned Power Apps, or how would you advise a new Power Apps developer to get over those mistakes. If you are new to Power Apps, check out our free class you'll find at pragmaticworks.com. You'll find a link to that, the App in a Day class, in the description of this video. It is absolutely free and there's no credit card required. Thanks for watching this video. See you later.